name's Matt Gagnon. I'm the editor-in-chief of Boom Studios. To my left, I have my buddy Caleb Monroe. Caleb is a writer. He writes Ice Age, Steven Mrs. Peel. He's written original series like The Remnant and little characters like Batman for DC Comics.
Peanuts.
Peanuts. Charlie Brown and Snoopy.
And this gentleman actually gave me my first break in comics, so.
Yeah, it's all my fault. So this is one of my favorite panels to do, because it usually ends up being a really great discussion full of people who obviously have a ton of ambition, have passion, are interested in being a part of the comic book community, whether that is as an artist, a writer, an editor for those brave souls that think being
very brave.
Yeah. Or working at a publisher, or letterers, colorists. This is a place for for all of you to have an outlet and a forum to talk about this stuff. The way I usually like to do this panel is kind of talk about how I got started, how I got my break in comics, where I'm at currently right now. Caleb will do the same thing, and then I found that it's always best to kind of like spend most of the time in the panel opening it up to questions and having a discussion, because that's going to be the most valuable way for you guys to get answers to the questions that you have. And I think that that's usually the best format for this type of panel. So I'm hoping for a lively discussion and for you guys to start thinking of some great questions. So just out of curiosity, how many people here are interested in becoming a comic book writer? Okay. How many people here are interested in becoming a comic book artist? Okay. How many people are a writer-artist? Some dual talents, okay. How about the publishing end of comics? Editing and or marketing? Few brave souls, all right, okay. How about like any graphic designers, production designers? Got a few over here, great. Colorists or letterers? All right, okay, two. So the thing about colorists and letterers, one of the most important parts of creating a comic book, like those are the unsung heroes of the comic book industry. They will absolutely save you every single month in and month out. So real quick, a little bit about me. As I said, I'm the editor-in-chief of Boom Studios. I started out in comic book retail. So I was working a comic book shop in Tucson, Arizona, of all places. I was also self-publishing comic books with my friends on a very, very small scale. I moved out to Los Angeles in 2003 and continued a career in retailing. I was working at Meltdown Comics on Sunset Boulevard. Oh wow, awesome!
Meltdowners.
Yeah, and I did all the buying and purchasing for the store there for many years. And actually, I worked with Caleb. That's
where we met.
Yeah, and this is actually actually great that Caleb is on the panel with me here today, because how we got our break in comics, I think, is very kind of salient for this discussion, and we're going to get into that. When I was working at Meltdown, I was a part of a comic book community, okay? And you meet a ton of people at a comic book shop, creators, you meet different fans, you'll meet people that are, if you're working in Los Angeles, people that are writers and directors of feature films that are maybe not working in comics but love comic books, and so it's just this great community atmosphere, and I love being a part of it. So through that process, through kind of working in this comic book community, I got to know a bunch of publishers as well. And I knew that I always wanted to get into publishing, and that was where my heart was. I wanted to make these things. I wanted to make comic books. I loved selling them. I had a great job selling comic books and being the buyer for Meltdown's various stores, but I knew I wanted to make them someday. So at the time, this was in '08, a small upstart company called Boom Studios approached me. It was the CEO, Ross, and I had known him for a little while, and he asked me if I wanted to come on as an editor. And at the time, it was a risk, right? Because Boom, it's not the company that it is today. It was very, very small. And comic book companies, as we know, can sometimes be fly-by-night, right? How many comic book companies, start, go away within 6 months? And I had this great job where I was, it was a very stable job, and I was established, and I had been doing it for years. But at the same time, I knew that if I wanted to get into, you know, again, where my heart was, publishing comics, I was going to have to take a risk, all right? And so at the end of the day, I really believed in Ross's vision. I believed in, you know, the ideas that he had, and so I took the risk to go over to Boom. But that opportunity came out of me being part of a comic book community, okay? And to me, that's one of the biggest things. It's the biggest part of breaking into comic books, which is you need to put yourself out there. And being part of a comic book community doesn't just mean working at a comic book shop or hanging out at a comic book shop or, you know, getting to know people that work at comic book shops. There's comic book communities that might be an online community, you know, it might be hanging out on message boards, it might be doing what you're doing right now and coming to conventions and getting to know people, but you have to become a part of this community, and I guarantee you that's where opportunities are going to come from. You are going to find like-minded people that are interested in the same things that you are, and at the time, back in, you know, let's say 05 or 06, when I was working with Caleb at Meltdown, we were just two guys working behind the counter, and we had almost zero opportunities, right? You know, and now, you know, many years later, what's very cool is all the people around you guys grow up together, right? And you guys help each other, and you guys offer different opportunities. And, you know, I mean, one of our other buddies was, you know, is Sam Humphries, you know, who did this small press comic book that he self-published called Our Love is Real, and is now writing Avengers for Marvel. And at the time, he was working for MySpace Comic Books, back when there was a MySpace Comic Books. Right. So, you know, and I mean, there's, for that example, there's 10 or 20 more, you know, people that we came up with that are now doing stuff in the industry, and it all came out of us hanging out together and going out and grabbing drinks and just, you know, talking about comics and being a part of this community. So for me, that's the #1 thing about breaking into comic books, and the #1 lesson that I try to be part of is, you know, become a comic book community, be around the people that are interested in the same things that you are.
My story is similar to that, and obviously overlaps. I decided back in 2000 that I wanted to write comic books, and so the first thing I did was find online community. So I hung out at a couple of message boards. Very first, back in 2000, 2001, it was the Top Cow message boards, and then I ended up hanging out for years at Digital Webbing. I met a ton of artists, a ton of writers that way, and I just made comics, so half of them never got published, but over the next 6 years, I made something like 300 pages worth of comics, and they were all 3, 5, and 8-page stories, pretty much. I got an artist, I was like, hey, let's do something. How many pages can you spare in your schedule? And we would just make something. We'd find anthologies if we could, and sometimes we couldn't, and it would just be something we swapped with each other with our friends.
It's making comics to make comics, you know, and for the love of the game. And I remember, you know, when Caleb and I became buddies, the first time I met Caleb, I think was it like 05 maybe? 05, 06? It was like 05 or 06. It was at, I think it was a Wizard World LA show. And, yeah, it might have been Wizard World LA. And I remember I walked by this guy's booth, and he just had like a couple self-published comic books that he had done on his own. And I thought they were really cool. And again, like, he had done them by himself with no help, with no other financing. You know, he had sort of put his money where his mouth was. I thought it was great. I picked up a couple copies, and I want to say, like, a couple months later, you know, Caleb had come into the comic shop, and I was like, oh, hey, I remember you from the convention, you know? And I think at the time he was looking for work, and I was like, oh, this guy seems really cool, you know, why don't we hire him at Meltdown? And that was, you know, that became buzz.
Yeah, and the other thing I did, besides just make comics every opportunity I got, is I shared those comics with everybody that I could.
Right.
And so eventually, a few years down the road, it was 2007, I guess, when I did my first series for Boom. But the reason that I could be brought in to even pitch for that series is because Matt had read all of these things I had made. Because he and I had been friends for a couple of years working at Comic Shop, and every time I made a story, I just showed it to him. I showed it to everybody. I would self-publish them, I would email them around. So, I mean, for me, it's crazy how you will meet someone and they will be like the unpaid intern who assists the assistant to the assistant. And then 3 years later, they're the editor-in-chief of a company. I've seen that happen a couple of times.
Yeah.
So really, I guess my rules for breaking into comics, the way I did it, the way I just, these patterns that I see is just make as many comics as you can, because that's how you get good. Show them to, make as many friends as you can, and then show everything that you make to all of your friends. And eventually, someone will be in a position to help you. And of course, you will try to help them every chance you get.
Yeah, and I think at that point, you're also, they're in a position to help you because you've done the work, and when I first had, put Caleb forth for a project, it was at a time of boom where I was very young at the company, and I didn't have, a ton of credibility yet, and I was pitching him for a project, and the reason I could do that is because he had self-published stuff, like if I had come to, the CEO of the company and I had said, oh, I really, I believe in this guy, I think he'd be great for the project, and he said, okay, well, what's he done? And I said, well, he hasn't done anything, but trust me, he's great. He's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. See, well, that's not the way. That's not the way you can really, take a risk. So, even if you have self-published work, right, that's still a huge step up, right? It's something that you can physically hand somebody that they've done. And by the way, for you writers out there, it's the fastest way that I can read material. As an editor, it's incredibly difficult for me to read scripts. I have a ton of reading that I have to do, over the course of my week, scripts, for projects that we're publishing. So I almost never have time to read unsolicited pitches. I mean, rarely even take them, right? But what I can do is if somebody walks up to me at a convention and they hand me a comic book, well, I can read that all day and I can read it quickly, right? And I can see if you know how to do, know how to work a page, know how to tell a story well. And furthermore, if you email me a series of pages, a 5-page story or something like that, I can digest that very quickly. So that's the other point that I always like to tell people in these panels is start small. I wish somebody had told me that when I was younger, right?
Well, and also, for those of you who are writers, a good script and a bad script looks the same at 20 paces. It's just black letters on white paper. Art is different. You can see art at 20 paces and be like, she's got something. But writing, the best thing to do is get someone to draw your story. Show that you can communicate to an artist and get something that's legible.
Yeah, and frankly, it shows a lot of ambition. If you're somebody who's looking for assignments, okay, and I realize that not everybody out there is, some of you may want to do your own comic books, but even if you're looking for a publisher, at some point you're going to need to interact with somebody in publishing, right? And it's going to go a long way to show that you have the ambition to take a project from A to B. You say, hey, it's done, here it is, I did this, okay? And I know how hard it is to make a comic book and how hard it is to actually, find a printer and get it done and find an artist and a letterer and make it professional, right? So when you hand me that, you're already starting at kind of a net positive, right? Because I understand that you're somebody who has not only taken the risk, but you have executed, right? And that type of execution is really important. It's something that I look for as an editor.
Yeah, when you see that someone is self-published, you're like, well, okay, they have stick-to-itness. They understand that there are all sorts of financial factors, scheduling factors. They understand how to keep a team together, even if it's just themselves.
Right.
Through that process, because a lot of people start things, but you stand out from 80% of the crowd just by being someone who finishes things. So yeah, having a self-published book, you're like, hey, I finished this.
Yeah, it gives you a huge leg up. And going back to what I was saying about starting small, when I was first starting out, I was like, oh, I'm going to write this huge epic. It's going to be this, Lord of the, Rings-esque thing, and I look back and I'm like, oh, what was I doing? It's just,
well, I never wrote any more than 8 pages just because that's all I could get artists to do for free.
Right.
It was all 2 to 8 pages because that's what I could get someone to commit to. So that's how
you were smarter than I learned that lesson the hard way. But yeah, after that, that was when I decided, when you're going to an artist, okay, drawing a comic book is far more time consuming than writing a comic book. Okay? It's like apples and oranges. So when you're going to an artist and asking them to devote time and make a commitment to your script, chances are all of you who are starting out probably have day jobs or night jobs. You know, I mean, you're doing this on your free time. Well, all of us started out that way, and it's incredibly difficult. So this is somebody who's going to be drawing at night or drawing in their spare time. They can make a commitment to 5 to 8 pages better than they can 22 pages for, you know, a graphic novel. You know, that's...
And you don't have to rule out the longer work, because if you guys or girls work together well for 5 pages, you try something else. You know, I had a lot of artists that we did 3 pages, and we got along really great. We had good chemistry, and so then we would do 20 pages, or a one-shot, or try 40 pages. And we would just go from there. It's kind of like dating.
It's building relationships. You know, that's what this whole industry is about. You know, this industry is this big. Okay, everybody knows everybody. And what you're doing is you're going out and you're finding people that are like-minded, that you actually enjoy participating and collaborating with, right? And the people that I enjoy working with, and I enjoyed working with years ago, are the people that I'm working with today. And when I have an open assignment, it doesn't matter if it's Planet of the Apes or if it's Hellraiser, you know, I want to work with the people that I enjoy working with, that I believe in, right? So it's all about building relationships, and that goes back to the community aspect too, and just getting out there and meeting people, you know, and creating content. And, you know, you would be shocked how powerful a 3-page story can be, complete, finished, done. It would blow your mind. I mean, it puts you in a completely different category. We were talking about Sam Humphries earlier. He did this book called Our Love Is Real. He self-published it. It was like 24 pages.
Something like that, yeah.
Like 24 pages, right? Like a year and a half later, he's writing some of the biggest titles at Marvel. I mean, it's a complete game changer.
And it was that book that did it, just 24 pages.
Yeah, 24 pages, he self-published it, he did it himself, and it was like a bomb going off. I mean, it completely, I mean, it made his career. You know, and it was because he put himself out there, he did it, and guess what? He shipped all the copies out himself, you know, did it from his living room, and, you know, called the retailers and asked them to, you know, to place, you know, small orders, and, you know, he really went out there and did it, and put himself in a position to perform, and he did, he succeeded.
He would spend like 12-hour days looking envelopes. You would see him and he would just be out of spit. So, you know, the importance of starting small, I mean, that's, you know, that's huge. And, you know, I think that most editors in this industry, you know, are kind of in the same situation that I'm in, which is, you know, they can take comic books sometimes, as a, you know, for writers, they can't necessarily take unsolicited submissions. For artists, it's much easier because it's visual, you know. I take a look at art and I know within, you know, maybe even like 3 to 5 seconds, like if I want to see more, it's instant. I've been doing it long enough that I can say, oh, this is, you know, this has appeal, or this needs work, or whatever. So that's much quicker. And I'll take a look at art all day, you know, especially at conventions. If somebody, you know, comes up with a portfolio, if I'm not immediately in the middle of something, I'll be happy to pull it open and take a look real quick and say, hey, I might not be able to give you a full portfolio review right now, but I can just take a quick look at, you know, at your pages. You know, because we're, you know, we're always looking for new artists. You know, I mean, it's one of the things that makes the industry go around, and it's one of my favorite things is finding new creators and new talent, which I believe is really important. Yeah, no, I agree. And also, when you're working short, it's actually harder, I think. It's harder to craft a punchy 3-page story than a punchy 20-page story. Because when you have 20 pages, you have a lot more freedom as far as building things up, pacing, room to fit in themes. But to create that same emotional impact in 3 pages is actually very difficult. And, you know, editors are aware of that. So when they can see something that's 5 pages, and it's really good, then they can extrapolate, like, this person would probably be great with 20 pages. It doesn't always work the other way.
Yeah, it actually shows a tremendous amount of skill to be able to do content on a small scale. All right, so that's, you know, kind of in a nutshell where we come from and kind of what our sensibility is, you know, very quickly on breaking into comics. What I want to do is, so we have enough time to get through everybody, I want to start it on questions and get the discussion going so we can start being very specific about answering questions that you guys have. So who's the first brave soul over here?
So you're talking about looking at portfolios. Yeah. What is it that you look for? Like, what are some things that you really look for in your portfolio?
Yeah, question question is, what do we look for in a good art portfolio? And for me, first and foremost, it's panel-to-panel storytelling. Unless you come to me and you want to be a cover artist, which happens from time to time, and then you just have covers, and that makes sense to me, right? But if you want to be a comic book storyteller, you have to have panel-to-panel storytelling, sequential pages in your portfolio. And more than that, you need to have a variety of pages in your portfolio. When I first started working at Boom, I would think that I'd found these great artists, right? And they would send me like 2 sequential pages, and I'd be like, these pages are amazing. This person's phenomenal. This is going to be the next big artist. And I might hire them for a small project or something like that. And then what would happen was, once they were on a page-a-day schedule, because you're typically going to be on a page-a-day schedule when you're working in comics, at least if you're on an assignment, what I would realize was they had spent like 4 months working on those 2 pages. So that's why they were incredible. And I'd be like, oh, what have I done, right? And that was a lesson that I learned early on in my career. So now when I'm looking at a portfolio, I want to see 10 pages, 15 pages, 20 pages. I want to see that this person has a large quantity of pages that are not just, they haven't spent 4 months working on 2 pages. But I mean, editors, I think, first and foremost are looking for panel-to-panel storytelling. For me, working in a company like Boom, where we do tons of different types of comic books, and we do everything from Adventure Time to Hellraiser. I mean, we do kids comics and all ages comic books through our Kaboom imprint. We do licenses and originals, more commercial stuff through the studios imprint. We have an alternative comics imprint called Boomtown. So we have we have assignments for all types of artists. So I'm happy to take a look at portfolios for people who are interested in working in all ages, or horror, or crime, or science fiction, or really anything.
I mean, when I look for artists just to do self-published work with and stuff, and I mean, my perspective is a little different because I'm not, I don't do it nearly as much as Matt does, but in addition to the panel-to-panel storytelling, I'm really looking for improvement. Like when I see, usually the most recent ones are in the front, and as you go back through, I'm like, is this person getting better with every page that they draw? And that, to me, is more valuable than somebody who is at a certain level, but is staying there. Someone who is improving and learning with every single page. I'm like, yeah, let's do something short, because they're going to be 5 pages better as an artist when we're done with our story, and maybe we'll want to go from there.
That's a good point. Yeah, over here.
I guess if you're starting to write a comic book and you don't have an artist on board and you want to try to just get something going and entice someone, I guess what would you recommend starting out, trying to do, let's say you suck at art, I mean, just doing stick figures just to show them what it would generally look like, or just maybe do a short story and then translate it into a comic book as it would look? I mean,
and you're saying as a writer to find an artist, to find somebody to collaborate with you. This is actually a great question for you, Caleb, because this is something that you're working on all day.
The eternal struggle.
Yes, the eternal struggle, especially as a writer, because you're going out and you're trying to find somebody to realize their vision, be a partner and collaborator with you. Back when I was doing it, I was looking online on forums and message boards, and again, I think what it comes down to is building the relationship. I think it's almost less about the concept sometimes, it's less about hey, I have this great idea, right? And it's vampires in space and they're all fighting each other. I think it's less about that and more like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm about. I'm real, I have passion, and if you can build that relationship with somebody and convince them that you're sane, right? And at the end of the day, when you send them your material and you have talent, which is overall the most important arbiter, right? Then I think you're going to have a much better chance, because ultimately you're going to be reaching out cold. But Caleb?
It's a wooing process. I mean, it really is. I wouldn't recommend trying to pitch something that's a comic without an artist attached. Comics are half art, more if you bring in coloring and all that sort of graphic design elements and stuff. So if you're interested in specifically writing comics, you've got to learn how to find an artist. I mean, there's an artist alley downstairs. I still, every convention I go to every booth in Artist Alley, talk to people, just try to...
It's part of your business.
Yeah.
I mean, as a writer, Caleb is constantly having to package his own material. you know, and whether he's bringing it to Boom, or he's bringing it to Image, or he's bringing it to IDW, you know, or he's going to ultimately self-publish it, you know, as a businessman, right? He has to be out, he has to be finding artists.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it can always be nerve-wracking to just sort of find somebody's work online. Maybe you don't know them and you're just cold emailing artists to see if they want to work with you. They don't know you from Adam. But after a while, you just realize, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? They don't respond.
Yeah.
Then I have survived that hundreds of times.
Yeah. Right.
And you will actually be surprised how many artists are just always generally interested to meet someone just who's like-minded and creative, and they may not have time in their schedule, but the way I approach it is I'm just trying to make friends, because 50% of the time they don't have time in their schedule, but they might in the next 6 to 8 months. And but I see something in their work that appeals to me, and so I'm interested in getting to know them better as a person. And people who are in comics love talking about comics. So we'll just, you know, I just try to start up a conversation just talking about comics, and not always, it's really not, to me it's not the hard sell of like, I've got to get you for this 8-page story. Because again, the very first published comic I ever had that was not self-published, someone published, it was an unpaid gig, but it was a 5-page backup story in this very indie comic called Government Bodies. And it was an artist that I was friends with. He and I were 2 pages into a story, which that was as far as we ever got into it, because he started working on this series. But he talked to the editor and he's like, I know, when they found out they were doing backup stories, and said, well, I know a writer, you should let him do the first backup story. And that was how I got the gig, because I had built a friendship with him and had not been like a heat-seeking missile trying just to get him to draw that one story, because he never did draw that one story. But we're still friends, and I got my first published work out of it. So I think you really need to take a relational approach, because the relationships will outlast any specific project that you have, and will be far, far more valuable.
Yeah, I could not agree more. You have a question?
Yeah, what do you recommend for the format for the student page? Should it be really like tip of the iceberg, like everything's coming, or should it be standalone? What kind of recommendations do you have for that?
Right, so the question is, you know, what should you do for a 4 to 8-page story? You know, should it be a standalone concept that has a beginning, middle, and end? Should it be the beginning of something larger? I think it can be either. You know, it's like this answer to come off glib, but like it's like as long as it works, you know. Like I think that if it's, you know, a 4-page story for something that's going to continue on in this much larger concept, as long as you land the joke, right, or you stick the landing, or you know, like that 4 pages has to have a point, right? And I think if you nail that and if you hit it, you're fine. I don't need to see the graphic novel that's gonna come from that. Just as long as you told a great story within the context of those 3 or 4 pages.
I think Hellboy provides an excellent example. If you go back and look at those first couple of trades of Hellboy when he was first creating the character, a lot of those were published as anthology stories. There's 2-pagers, there's 8-pagers, there's 10-pagers. You know, as he was sort of working out who the character was before the book built momentum and he got his own series, they were all standalone in that the story was wrapped up in 2 pages or 8 pages. But obviously there was a very rich world there, and you could just return to that well, and they still are, just again and again and again. So I think if you want your story to sort of be a prelude to something bigger, I still recommend making it self-contained, but Hellboy, I think, provides an excellent template for showing something self-contained where it's obvious that so many stories could be told in this world.
Yeah, Hellboy is a great example because I think it shows you that as professionals, whether you're an artist or writer or you're working in publishing, like we're all students of the craft, right? And so when we look at a 2-page story or a 3-page story or a 5-page story, and like somebody nails it, like that gets us excited, you know. And like that's what Mike Mignola's doing, or whoever's working on those books. You know, they're doing something really special in the context of 2 or 3 pages, and it's like, wow, like that's mind blowing to us because we've been studying this craft for so long. And when you can do that on a small scale, it really makes you stand out. And going back to this gentleman's question, it's like, when you know, finding an artist, finding the first one is always the hardest. But once you find that first one, something happens, right? If you can just get that 2-page story or that 3-page story, well, now you're a comic book creator. And you can take that 2-page story or 3-page story and you can send it to a variety of different artists, and they're going to be able to see that you finished something, and you've done something, and oh, there's another excellent artist that's worked with this person. And it becomes, I think, a little bit easier at that point because you have credentials.
Momentum.
There's a question for you in the back over here.
Hi, a couple times you've mentioned including stories in anthologies. I'm an artist writer looking to send out my stories to anthologies. Can you mention some titles of places I might look?
Caleb,
you know, I think all the anthologies that I got published in don't exist anymore. You know, I think that there are. I actually used to maintain on my website a page called Comic Book Creator Services, which listed hundreds of submission guidelines for anthologies and stuff like that. It was a page that I wished it existed when I was getting started, so I created it. I don't host it anymore, but a gentleman named Dan Hill does. It's still called Comic Book Creator Services. I would hit there and see just because it's a constantly evolving process. Anthologies in particular, a lot of times will be just one-off. Someone will put that anthology together, they will publish it, and it will be gone, you know, it will never happen again. So it's a constant, it is a constant searching process. But also webcomics.
Webcomics are great too.
Comixology Submit, you can now sell a 10-page story on Comixology, which is not something that I could do when I was starting, and I'm working on some stuff for that now.
Yeah, and the anthology question is a great question, and I think that, you know, it's something that it feels to me, and I might be misspeaking right now, but it feels to me like it was much more prevalent like 5 or 6 years ago than it did. Like I used to see a lot more. I would see Flight and 24/7 and Pop7. Yeah, I mean there was tons of anthologies that were happening like 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm not seeing as many of them now. I'm wondering if it's webcomics. Maybe.
I think digital. Also, I think that when you meet some of the editors of those like giant, thick anthologies, they're just broken men. just trying to corral 100 writers and 100 artists. Yeah. There's a reason that anthologies are usually more.
It's like herding cats for 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, I think look, webcomics. It's crazy that we haven't covered this yet. Talk about a great way to get your work into people's hands, right? I mean, you can even use Tumblr as, you know, as a way of putting up your pages, right? Handing a business card to an editor and saying, oh, if you go to this link, you'll see my work. And it's the same concept. I can go and I can read comics online very quickly, right? And you can tell what you're...
And even my print work, Batman, all this sort of stuff, I still scan those in and put digital versions on the back end of my website just because it's so much easier to email an editor a link if they ask to see your samples, than to try to email them a giant file, or to zip it, or FedEx it, or whatever. Just have those links ready and just be like, and if you do your stuff digitally in the first place, it just makes it that much easier, because there's a dedicated home for your work.
Okay, gentleman in the back.
Yeah, when you were starting up, you say you have a job, part-time job. How much did it break your wallet trying to get an artist, or it was just a collaboration type of thing? That's, I mean, a lot of people here, but then you go online and you find people from Philippines and whatnot and Malaysia.
Very good question. And it's, you know, how much is it worth spending on an artist? You know, how much does it break your wallet when you're working a part-time job and you're having to pay for things outside of your own pocket? And man, it is a tough question to answer. And it's sort of a case-by-case scenario. You know, I think as an individual, we all know what our financial situation is, and you know, we probably have a core understanding of like what's appropriate, what we can do, and what we can't do. And most of the time, if you're looking for an artist online and you're finding somebody who's willing to work with you when you're just starting out, they're probably not going to be somebody who's working at Marvel and DC and making, you know, tons of money per page, or you know, they're going to be starting out like you, or you know, if they are interested, they kind of know what the situation is going in, or at least hope they do. So it's really a case-by-case thing, and
yeah, I think instead of starting with the project and then working back to your wallet as far as how much it's going to impact your wallet, I recommend starting with your wallet and just go out into the world knowing what you can afford. And if that is nothing, which it was for most of the 6 years that I was getting started, then that was always in that first email to the artist. Like I can't afford to pay I know that you deserve to be paid, and I'm really sorry, but I'm broke, and they get it because they're also starving artists.
And it's all about setting expectations, you know. Caleb nailed it. If you set the expectation from the get-go, first and foremost, and you just say, hey, you know, this is not a paying gig, you know, or this is a paying gig, it's an assignment, but you know, I can only do $200 or $300. You know, then they know exactly what they're getting into.
Well, you know, funny story, I emailed an artist at random. I had found his samples online and I really liked his work. This was years ago, 2006, I think, or 2007. And he, you know, it was his job and he's like, I have to get paid at least this much. And I'm like, you know, well, but I was like, thanks for your time. He's like, thanks for your time, you know, like, let's stay in touch. And I sent his samples to Matt. Because I'm like, well, Matt's at a company, so if he needs a cool artist, and Matt was doing some Farscape at the time, and these samples were science fiction samples, Star Wars stuff. And years later, Matt ended up hiring him to draw Steve and Mrs. Peel that I was writing. So I did end up working with that artist, but
it's a great
6 years later.
6 years later, it's a great example. Yeah.
And now he's doing what, Fearless Defenders at Marvel.
Yeah, it's like you can't put too fine a point on it. It's like it's building relationships, and I guarantee you that you're going to start coming up with a generation of people. Like it's going to be in ways that you will never expect, but it's going to happen, and that's why, you know, you be good to people, you treat them well. You know, you treat them the way you want to be treated. Have an authentic relationship with them. You know, I'm not a big networking fan. I just like to make friends with people and go out and find people that are interested in the same things that I am. And when you do that, I mean, I guarantee that you're going to have opportunities come your way. I think we have about 13 minutes left, so let's do like rapid fire round questions, and we'll just start making our way through some. Gentlemen, yeah.
You were talking to her about the pages. A lot of companies want to see like 5 pages of artwork.
No.
Would you recommend like an action scene or a dialogue or just something sequential?
Oh, that's great. Good question. Yeah. So, you know, what do you recommend in terms of the, you know, the content of the story that you're working on? I would say, you know, something that is representative of what you're looking to write, what you're good at. Just do whatever you're the best at. If it's slice of life and you're good with you know, relationships and romance or whatever, you know, do that. If it's, you know, action stuff, if you're looking to get assignments on action books, do that. You know, when you're doing 5 pages and you're sending stuff to editors, it's about making the biggest impact that you can. So do whatever you are the best at.
And if you're trying to pitch like a longer book, then first 5 pages. Because if they're not hooked in the first 5 pages, your readers probably won't be either. So just open the book however you think is the best way to open that particular story. And if it's a slice of life or if it's a giant science fiction epic, those openings will be different. But do the first 5 because you know, when I'm in a comic shop and I'm shopping, I'll flip something open, read the first couple pages, but if I'm bored by page 5, I'm probably not going to buy that book, and the editors probably won't either.
All right, the middle.
If you're an artist without a writer, what do you recommend working off of for your portfolio? Like, use like a script, like where would you find it?
If you Google comic book scripts, there are a ton. If you go to my website, I have one that I wrote for an artist. It's got a Marvel character, a DC character. It's got establishing shots, action shots, quiet shots, fantasy superheroes. I wrote this crazy 4-page thing specifically so he could show off that he can do perspectives, that he can do buildings, fantasy landscapes, all this sort of stuff. It's just posted on my website. But if you Google comic book scripts, whoever your favorite writer is, you can find a script from them and just work from it.
You'll find more, you know, more scripts, Brian scripts, and you'll find all sorts of things online. But again, it goes back to what you're interested in. Focus in on what you really want to draw. If you want to be drawing action comics, do action. If you want to be drawing superheroes, find superhero scripts. There's a ton of opportunities, you know, and I think like now more than ever, you know, what comes to mind immediately for me is the Adventure Time books that we do over at Boom. Like a lot of those backup stories are from writers and artists, and the webcomics that I consume, and I'm sure a lot of you folks do too, are typically writer-artists. So, you know, I think there's as many opportunities as anybody else. If you look at somebody, there's so many examples. Jeff Parker, okay. Jeff Parker started out doing The Interman, where that he wrote and drew, right? And then he went on to become primarily a writer, and he's doing stuff with Marvel, Marvel is doing stuff at DC. He can also draw as a terrific artist, but you know that's where Ed Brubaker started out writing and drawing his own stuff. If you guys are Ed Brubaker fans, go look up Low Life.
And also, if you do both, you have completely circumvented the eternal struggle, which is wooing an artist. So just start making it work.
The only thing stopping you is you.
In the back there.
I want to know, when you first approach an artist, do you copyright your stuff before you give it to them, or do you just copyright the whole thing?
Yeah, you know, I think it, you know, that's a difficult one from the perspective of, you know, typically when you're just starting out, you know, to me is, you know, it's not too much of a concern because you know, what are you copywriting it from, right? You know, the chances of somebody going out and grabbing that idea and taking it and running off to Hollywood and making a multi-million-dollar movie is like infinitesimal. You know, it's
especially if you're doing 3-page stories.
Yeah, if you're doing 3-page stories, why not? But look, you know, it's you know, it's very easy to do that and cover your tracks. And by the way, you know, when you're sending an email to somebody, that email can act as a binding legal document with language at the bottom. So you're really protecting yourself in that way anyway. So you can have like some very boilerplate legal language at the bottom of your email when you're reaching out and contacting people, rather than saying, you know, this is copyrighted material. You're already protected over the course of your communication with them.
And you know, it depends. Like when I do a story that's creator-owned with the artist, you know, my preference is that we own it 50-50. So I don't do anything until there's an artist on board, because whoever the artist is will determine the ultimate final version of that story is how we're going to copyright it. If you have something that's your baby, but otherwise, I've never had a story stolen, and I've sent so many stuff out into the ether, hundreds and hundreds of things over the years. And in comics, which is a monthly medium, people place more value on your ability to come up with a constant stream of good stories instead of just like that one great story. So I never worried about it too much. I was like, well, something gets stolen, that's okay, I've got 100 more stories. And they're still only going to have one.
Question over here?
Yeah, I'm kind of the other way. I'm an artist looking for a writer. Where's a good place to find some good writing?
Here, if you're a writer, raise your hand. Throw a rock. No, it's you know, it's the same sort of thing. You know, I think that with writers, you know, you might have even you know, you might have it a little bit easier actually. You know, if you're somebody whose art is, you know, is appealing to a lot of different people, then you know, there's probably a ton of independent writers, you know, who are, you know, getting their start in comics, working at companies like, you know, like you mentioned, IDW and Boom and Dynamite, and, you know, people like Caleb, who, you know, you can reach out to. They're maybe not like, you know, Marvel and DC superstars yet, but they're doing stuff. And like I said, drawing is, you know, so much more time consuming than writing. So you can find your writers working on 1 or 2 projects for comic book companies, and you know, they have time to do a 3-page story or a 5-page story or 8-page story.
And pretty much every writer I know at every level of comics is looking for an artist, because there's always some other idea they got in the back of their mind that they wouldn't mind launching. So, you know, go to Artist Alley, find some books that you think are well written or that look like interesting stories, start talking to those writers, show them your samples. One of them will bite.
The other thing I was wondering is, I know, like, for instance, DeviantArt is a huge place for artists. Mm-hmm. Like, I see artists all the time there. Is there a place online for writers, specifically like comic artists, kind of like that kind of community?
Not so much. And again, it has to do more with the fact that at 20 paces, good and bad writing looks the same. You can, and it works the same on the website. You can click and see interesting art and build a relationship that way, but you know, an unintelligible script and a brilliant script look essentially the same until you take the time to read it. So those communities are very slow to build, but there are groups out there. I mean, when I was part of the digital webbing message boards, there was a specific writers area. There's, I think, like a comic book script archive online, a guy who gets writers to give him full scripts that he posts online, and so you'll have a lot of writers kind of hanging around there because they're learning the craft.
In the front here.
Is the market for kids comics, i.e. 7 to 12, big names commercially, that kind of scholastic type thing, is that a different break-in than classic comics?
Yeah, I mean, those are usually, those usually break out through the book trade, which is different from the comic book direct market, right? Comic book direct market is specialty comic book stores, and, distributed through Diamond distributors. If you're looking at, books that were, generated by Random House or HarperCollins, something that was generated exclusively through Scholastic, that's all coming through the book trade through different channels.
Yeah, they're all 98% book publishers, so they work pretty much the same way. So you break in with that sort of stuff the same way you break into writing novels.
And then we have one in the far, yeah.
What's the best advice that anyone's ever given you regarding your comic industry career?
Ooh, the best advice.
Best advice ever, wow.
It'll sound cheesy, but like never stop. Just like you have to be relentless, and you're gonna fall, and you're gonna fail, but you can't succeed without putting yourself in a position to fail, right? So you have to put yourself out there, and that can be scary, it's something that sometimes you never even get over, but you have to keep putting yourself out into the industries, keep putting yourself out into the world. But if you really want to be a part of this, you sort of need to like come to terms with the fact that it's gonna be a journey. And you have to be comfortable with taking the good with the bad. So just be relentless, never stop.
Yeah, and I kind of already said mine, but I remember specifically I was at San Diego, I was with a friend, we had both come up on the digital webbing boards, it kind of started from nothing, but he had suddenly sort of blown up. He had a book at Dark Horse, he had a book at Top Cow, and we were having a drink, and his editor-in-chief came over from one of those companies and said a few words and walked off, and he's like, yeah, that's my editor-in-chief, he's editing this book I'm doing, but when I had first pitched the book to them, he was the intern. Just to show like how, he's like, so you just never know. He's like, so I mean, what I learned in that moment was that it's about relationship, and that you can't build your relationship on what you think a person can do for you, because that can change in 6 months.
Yeah.
You need to build your relationship on what you have in common and whether you get along. There's plenty of people in comics that you can be friends with,
Yeah, it needs to be authentic. Way in the back.
Yes. When submitting a script to an artist, is there a specific format or programming format? Is it pretty much just whatever communicates your ideas in the standard form?
Again, I would recommend just Googling comic book scripts with your favorite writer's name in there and just look at how they do it, but everyone does it a little bit different. I write mine in Final Draft, then I drop the files into Word, and I drop in actual pictures for reference and stuff like that. When I'm asking them to draw some crazy thing from history, I go and look that up for them so they don't have to do that. But everyone does it a little bit different, because only really your artist, your editor, and possibly your colorist or editor need to be able to understand it, which is why there's no, screenwriting is standardized, because 10,000 people have to do their job based on what you wrote, so they need to know where to find the information. But with comics, it's just kind of a letter between you and your artist, so.
Yeah, that's the thing, as a writer, sometimes I get scripts where like the prose is so flowery and beautiful, and like it's the way they turn a phrase or a sentence and the action lines is amazing, and I'm like, wow, like they did all this just for me. I'm the only person that's going to read, me and the artist.
Yeah, no one will ever see those beautiful panel descriptions.
Yeah.
Now, if you're trying to evoke a mood in your artist,
yeah,
so that they have a certain frame of mind, that it can be worth it to write it just for the artist, but you have to keep in mind you're writing a blueprint, you're not writing a final product.
Right, so you want it to be concise, you want it to be to the point, and not have a ton of fat on the bones. 5 minutes, we'll take more over the corner.
I just have a comment. Someone who's a very different script to all the writers. Really look at the script and see if this is 2 panels or 1. Because what I find is sometimes the writers don't realize this is not a movie. This is not that kind of sequential image. And they have to break down and be clear about what's in each individual panel.
Yeah, absolutely. You know,
You can't have flashing lights. You
Yeah.
can't have more, I mean, you can do, there's certain visual tricks you can do to pull things off, but in general, a panel is a single moment in time, and you have to keep that in mind.
It's a frozen moment in time.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, like you know, sometimes it goes in reverse, and writers have a difficult time figuring out how to move things, and I call it turning doorknobs. You know, like young writers, what they'll do is like, you know, the person comes to his apartment, and they open the doorknob, and then they walk through in the next panel, and they get to the stairs, and they walk up the stairs, and then in the next panel, they walk down the hallway, and in the next panel, they turn the other doorknob, and it's like, no. In panel 1, the person walks into the apartment, in panel 2, they're already in their apartment. You know what I mean? Like you know, the reader is competent enough to make the jump, right? So you don't need the turning doorknobs.
What's important? What's important?
Yep. What's the most important? What's the most important moment? The most important image? Okay.
Yeah. How do you guys typically work with a colorist? And what's your experience? What are you usually looking for?
Oh, it varies by project. You know, for the all ages stuff that we do with Kaboom, if it's Peanuts or Garfield or Adventure Time, I'll typically find somebody who has like more like flat coloring. You know, because they're not doing a ton of rendering. Those characters don't need a ton of rendering, so it's a much more simplistic style of coloring. If it's you know, Planet of the Apes or Hellraiser, it's going to be a much more modeled, rendered style. But also, aside from the content and subject matter, it's about who the artist is, right? And there's some people that have like super rendered like pencils and inks, and then like you don't want another super rendered colorist over that because it just starts to get really muddy. So it just depends on the artist that you're working with and the comic book that it's on.
Yeah. As far as how I work with them, you know, as I'm writing a script, if there's something that I'm trying to convey in the story and I need it to be done with colors, then I will actually break out bold letters, all caps, and say coloring note.
Right.
So that he or she can find those pretty easily. I'll do the same thing, lettering note. You know, I did some I'm always experimenting. I did issue 4 of Steed and Peele. We kind of tried to smuggle a black and white comic into a color comic, and because we set it at our version of Truman Capote's Black and White Ball, where everything was black and white, even though it was a color world. And so I had conversations for months before that issue with the colorist, just because, you know, we wanted to go back and forth about like how that would work best. But then a lot of times, if it's just something normal, I said you can't do flashing lights, but I did do one. They were in a bunker. The warning light was going off, so every other panel had to be shaded red because the lights were going off.
That's the type of experiments that I love from Caleb.
But I try to break that information out for the colorist, so they don't have to go hunting through a giant paragraph describing things where there's 2 words about color in there.
All right, one more. You can find it online. You know, if you type into Google, like, you know, boilerplate.
Like email, boilerplate, or legal signature, or something like that.
Yeah,
legal signature. A bunch of examples.
Yeah, and you can copy that into all of your emails. Have it in the SIG. One more quick one. Okay.
I guess not that quick. With ideas, sometimes the idea of what idea is the best is not, I have 100 ideas, but which one is really the best idea? What's like the defining thing that says, wow, this is it? Because obviously, Paul Blart was a good idea for someone $1 million, but was it really a good idea? How do you differentiate that?
As far as my personal ideas, I filter it 2 ways. One, I filter it by the artist I'm working with. Some artists are going to fit certain ideas better than others. So I will, if I find an artist and they're interested in working with me, I will send them what I think are the 2 to 5 ideas that suit their style best and ask them which one they want to do. And that's how that idea will get chosen. And then I said 2 ways and I've already forgotten the other one. You know.
The second way is whatever you're the most passionate about.
Yeah, whatever is the most ready. I have 100 ideas at any given time, but I may not be ready to write some of them. They may need another 6 months, 3 months
Research and development.
or I have to read 6 books before it's ready to execute. So I look at what I'm ready to execute now, and then I look at what goes with the artist or publisher that I'm trying to work with.
All right, I think we have reached the end. If anybody didn't get their question answered, you can always reach me and Caleb on Twitter. Caleb is at Caleb Monroe. I'm at Matt E. Gagnon, G-A-G-N-O-N. So that's M-A-T-T, E as in Edward, G-A-G-N-O-N. Feel free to hit us up. And thank you guys very much for coming out today. Best of luck to all of you.